over the years, there's all this rumor of there's more footage out there we haven't seen. Are we going to see an even longer cut of Lord of the Rings down the road?
If there's enough interest from people.
As you can imagine, they filmed a lot for the Lord of the Rings movies. In this video, we'll explore all of the deleted and alternate scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring that we know of, drawing from basically everything we could get our hands on. Note that there might be many more scenes that we don't know of. Peter Jackson revealed that they have around 1300 hours of raw footage for the trilogy, which is a lot. While an extended edition 2.0 seems unlikely at this point, here's at least a glimpse into what that could look like and the vast world of unseen material. Let's get straight into it. First off, we have the prologue, a section which has had a lot of different versions and a lot of cut material. One of the biggest things that they actually omitted is the character of Gil-Galad. Gil-Galad was removed completely from the prologue except for one brief scene where you can see him killing an orc and him being one of the elves receiving the ring. In that original prologue, they name him multiple times, both saying that he marched together with Elrond and Elendil, and also that he was killed by Sauron, something that they actually filmed, and that would be very accurate to how he died in the books. A very brutal scene where Sauron basically lifts Gil-Galad up and burns him to death with the heat of his hand. Actor Mark Ferguson said that he was really surprised that they cut him out completely.
Of course, at the beginning I thought there's no way I could be cut out. I'm central to the plot, really. Having, by being the only one who was going to go head to head with Sauron, and it's while that battle is happening.
They already had Elendil show up and then die within a minute, so to have another character do that would just be a little bit confusing, and they instead decided to put the focus on Elrond, who would show up throughout all three movies instead of introducing yet another character that would die a couple of seconds later. A lot of ideas were considered for the prologue, and many were taken even as far as being filmed and recorded. Originally, the prologue was much longer and more complex. Much of this was changed and simplified in the final version of the prologue that we see in the movies. In the original prologue, we first zoom into Lothlorien and see elves dancing and running around the forest, and there's footage and images from multiple sources for this particular part. The camera then moves to Dimrill Dale and the flourishing kingdom of Khazad-dûm, where we see dwarves mining and crafting, something which is a bit sad that they removed, as we only get to see Moria after its downfall in the movie. But we're not sure if this was ever filmed, but some of the ideas seems to have been implemented in the prologue of the first Hobbit movie in Erebor, as some of those shots are very similar to the ones here. We then see the race of men, the Rohirrim, Minas Tirith, the Halls of Kings, and then Mordor and Sauron, established as a Maya spirit as well as the Dark Lord. We also see the elves of Eregion forging the Rings of Power. All this was simplified a lot in the final movie version, which is understandable as it could have been a little bit too much to take in right away for the brand new viewers, but it would have been nice to see the full version in the extended edition of the movie. In the DVD extras for the Fellowship of the Ring, we actually get to see this original prologue. This version has a young male as the placeholder narrator, probably because they were considering Frodo as a narrator for the prologue at one stage, since he did write The Lord of the Rings as seen in the ending of Return of the King. We don't know if they ever recorded this with Frodo though. Another character considered to narrate the prologue was Gandalf. We actually have two different versions of this. One is from some promotional video material for the Fellowship of the Ring.
Legend tells of a ring created by an ancient evil that gave its wearer the power to enslave the world, believed lost for centuries.
It's likely this voiceover could have been made for the prologue, but it could also have been made for only the promotion. The other version of Gandalf narrating the prologue is more probable, as it's more similar to the narration in the original storyboard clip. And this audio is from the video game The Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, and could either have been recorded for the movie originally and reused for the game, or been recorded for the game and inspired by the original prologue narration from the movie. Some of you may have noticed on the official soundtrack for the Fellowship of the Ring that there is a track called The Prophecy, which can't be heard in the movie. That's because this track was most likely meant for the old original prologue. When they changed the prologue as much as they did, the music needed to be redone. To recreate the original prologue and get a taste of what it was most likely like, we've taken a cover of The Prophecy and put Gandalf's narration to it.
The world of Middle-earth is changing. The beauty of the elves fades. It passes into legend, into myth, into dreams. The ancient spirits of earth, fire, air, and water will once roamed this earth freely are forgotten. But it was not always so.
More time was also spent filming the 7 dwarves and the 9 men receiving the rings than you would have first thought from watching the movie. There are more angles and photos from these scenes. The storyboard and the behind the scenes material show that they actually wanted to show Sauron forging the ring, where he would have molten gold in his hand and then stab himself with a dagger, and the blood and gold would then mix and form the ring around his finger. You can briefly see this in the final prologue, as the scene where they talk about the forging of the ring, he holds a bloody dagger in his left hand if you look carefully, which is a leftover from this forging scene I just mentioned. And this then leads us into the War of the Last Alliance. A lot was cut from this, such as Gil-Galad, as said previously, but there was also much more battle footage cut, which happened a lot during all of the battle scenes throughout this trilogy. Shots of orcs, elves mobilizing before the battle, and even magazine images of dead Gondor soldiers. As seen in the DVD extras, the scene where Elrond tries to convince Isildur to cast the One Ring into the fire of Mount Doom was originally in the prologue, but was omitted and later added back into the movie, which I'm glad they did. Lastly, Alan Lee also mentioned in a webinar a few years ago that he actually did some drawings for the Blue Wizards and even some light costume work, but they never made it into the movies.
Alan, would you like to do an illustration of the Blue Wizards?
Well, in fact, I have done.
Oh, have you?
There's about a week during the filming of The Lord of the Rings when they were actually in the script.
Right.
We were going to see all 5 wizards appearing in Middle-earth on the shore.
But we haven't seen this yet, this image, no?
It was, no, they were just pencil drawings. So
Right.
we got as far as making some props, some stars,
Right.
mocking out some costumes and trying them on extras. The idea was dropped before it was committed to film.
They would most likely also have shown up during the prologue, as he said that we were gonna see all 5 wizards together, indicating that it's obviously before the fall of Saruman. Nevertheless, there was a lot of different versions of the prologue and things that were cut, and hopefully at some point we will see some of this material, especially the forging of the ring by Sauron would have been really cool to see the material for. Next up, we have a little bit of an extended scene with Frodo and Gandalf when Gandalf first arrives in the Shire.
You've printed a lonely mountain.
More talk about Bilbo, as well as Gandalf teaching Frodo Sindarin from one of the books that Frodo is reading.
Echenin, it's from the verb echedo.
Plural, not singular.
That's right. It's Sindarin, the language of elves.
From various magazines and physical sources, there's photos of various hobbits, including Fatty Bolger, who does have a larger role in the books, and he was a close friend to Frodo and even knew about the ring and helped out. And there is a photo of him in front of Bag End, as well as a photo of him running away from a Nazgul, but it's unclear what his role would have been in the movie. Some other hobbits that are shown in these images are Robin Smallburrow and Rufus Burrows. Robin is actually the long-standing sheriff of the Shire, and Rufus Burrows is actually the hobbit who says after being beheaded by the Ringwraith. There's actually a surprising amount of images of both these characters, and especially Rufus, indicating that they would probably have had a bigger role in the movie if all the material was used. They also had a bit of an alternate take on how Gandalf would be portrayed, as in the final version he's obviously smoking a lot, but they had one version where he would instead be munching on toffees all the time and taking his first smoke with Bilbo just before the party, and then the toffee bag would make a return at the Council of Elrond. I'm not sure if the point was to try and show Gandalf trying to stop smoking or something like that, but in the end the toffee bag idea was completely scrapped from the movie. At Bilbo's party there was quite a lot of extra scenes cut, such as Pippin playing a banjo, Frodo playing the drums, as well as a lot of dancing scenes. And Sean Astin even complained that he had to do a lot of dancing rehearsals for weeks, but most of it ended up being cut from the final version. As well as an alternate version of when Frodo tries to convince Sam to ask Rosie out for a dance.
Go on, Sam. Ask Rosie for a dance. What, me? Just walk up and take her hand. I'll do a hand. I think I'll just have another hand.
There's an extended version of Merry and Pippin doing the dishes after blowing up the fireworks. It kind of changes the tone of the scene a little bit, as you can see them laughing and talking with Gandalf, instead of Gandalf actually being mad at them like he is in the final version. When it comes to the Green Dragon interior, Richard Taylor, the president of Weta Workshop, responsible for a lot of the props, sets, armor and such, said that he was a little bit sad that a lot of the scenes from the inside of the Green Dragon was cut, as they had built the entire interior of the Green Dragon. But the interesting part is that when they rebuilt Hobbiton for the Hobbit movies, they rebuilt both the inside and outside of the Green Dragon and kept that so that you can still visit it today if you take the Hobbiton movie set tour. There's also an alternate version of Bilbo's goodbye with Gandalf, where he hugs him instead of just shaking his hand.
Goodbye, dear Bilbo.
Goodbye, Gandalf.
I kind of like the hugging, so I'm not sure why that was changed to a simple handshake. There are also a couple of shots from the magazines that prove that they actually built a set for what looks like Frodo's bedroom, or potentially Bilbo's, but I think this is Frodo's bedroom. But it's really unclear what kind of scene they had planned there, as in the final version of the movie we never really see their bedroom, and the only time we see Frodo in bed is obviously in Rivendell. There's a little bit of an extended and alternate scene when Gandalf talks about the ring and what happens if Sauron gets it back.
It is the Master Ring.
Shadow has risen again.
Sauron needs only this ring to beat down resistance, cover all the lands of a second darkness.
There's an entire scene cut from after when Sam and Frodo has left the Shire and they're struggling to fall asleep, and there's actually a deer among other animals that completely interrupts them, and they even said that there's 29 different takes of a deer sniffing around them trying to fall asleep, but obviously that entire scene ended up being cut from the movie. An interesting extended / alternate scene is between Saruman and Gandalf, where the dialogue is a bit more of Saruman saying they should take the Master Ring themselves and not just join Sauron. The tone is a little bit different, as I think in the final cut it really makes it seem more like Saruman wants to join Sauron, whereas in this version he straight out said, let's take the Master Ring for ourselves.
The Hobbit cannot contend with the will of Sauron. There are those who can. Why not take the ruling ring? We command that. We command, Middle-earth.
But now we get to something really interesting. Tom Bombadil. A lot of people think that he was actually cut from the movie or was planned to be in it because they've seen these images. But the thing is, in 2001, Decipher decided to create a Lord of the Rings trading card game that would be based on Peter Jackson's visuals. And as far as I know, this came out slightly after the movies, and what they figured was that let's create some cards of the characters that didn't make it into the movies, such as Glorfindel, Radagast the Brown, and of course Tom Bombadil and his wife Goldberry. So they did actually bring in real actors, and they collaborated with Weta Workshop, who created all of these costumes that they then used to take the shots for these trading cards. Tom Bombadil was never planned in the movie, so they had to recycle a Gandalf costume, dye it blue, and then remade a Hobbit hat for him. However, Radagast the Brown was actually planned to have a brief cameo in the movie, so they already had a costume made for him that they could then use in the trading cards. But that's the backstory behind these images that a lot of people think are cut out from the movie, and even though it's linked to the movie, they weren't planned to actually be in the movie except for Radagast the Brown. As for Weathertop, there was a lot of alternate shots there, nothing major, but a couple of glimpses of things we didn't get to see in the final version that they showed off in the behind the scenes material. There was also a completely different alternative to Arwen when she arrives to save Frodo, where she would have arrived in more of like a dress and fancy clothing, but then instead they gave her more practical clothes in the movie, which makes sense. Yes, she does have kind of like fancy clothing and a dress when she shows up glowing in that vision for Frodo, but that's not the same clothing as you can see in this deleted scene, meaning that I think they've basically found a middle ground of having her being fancy and all in that bright vision, but then have more practical clothes in reality. There's also a few extra shots of Arwen being hunted by the Nazgul, with some really close call of them nearly and or actually hitting her, but I think it made more sense to kind of keep them slightly behind her all the time until she passes the river. When Frodo wakes up in Rivendell, there is actually a scene where he kind of looks out over Rivendell and we don't really see what he's looking at. They did shoot a scene here where he sees Arwen and then Aragorn appearing and them having kind of like a tender moment together, but they skipped that out completely, having it more unknown what Frodo was looking at. I'm thinking maybe they did this as they wanted to keep Aragorn and Arwen's relationship a bit more hidden from the rest of the Fellowship, or at least make it seem like that for us viewers. There's also a lot of extended footage from Rivendell, with shots of Frodo and Sam walking around talking with each other, more scenes with the Hobbits. There's also some footage of Arwen speaking with the Hobbits in Rivendell, which is completely cut from the final version because she doesn't really interact with them there at all. Back to some magazine photos that actually confirm that they planned scenes where Gandalf and Elrond would be in Elrond's chamber, as well as them having some kind of dinner together. There's also rumors that Bilbo would partake in this dinner and the three of them would have a conversation, but there's no actual photo evidence of that, but only this one of the dining table with Elrond and Gandalf.
It must be destroyed.
The Council of Elrond is a big one of the scenes that they spent the most time filming, which means a lot was cut, such as Elrond reciting the entire poem about the ring.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor, where the shadows lie.
As well as Gandalf talking about how Sauron forged the ring and how it even contains his blood.
Sauron himself forged the One Ring. Molten gold mixed with his own blood contains his life force.
Again, this could be where the forging of the ring scene I talked about during the prologue could potentially be, but I still think it was supposed to be in the prologue. Some more extended dialogue, such as Elrond mentioning that the 9 companions of the Fellowship matches the 9 members of the Ringwraiths.
9 companions to match the 9 Ringwraiths.
Some goofy dialogue between Merry and Pippin.
Did you hear that? We're part of the Fellowship.
As the Fellowship prepared to leave Rivendell, there was an extended farewell between Elrond and Frodo, featuring a one-on-one conversation. Additionally, there was a brief moment between Arwen and Legolas as they said goodbye, suggesting that they might have known each other before, and other than this deleted scene, we don't really have any interactions between Arwen and Legolas at all, and both of these scenes were completely omitted from the final version of the film. They filmed a lot of aerial shots of the Fellowship, and there's plenty of unused material for that, both from up in the snowy mountains and down on the plains as well. And apparently they shot a scene of Gandalf stumbling down a steep hill and Legolas catch him while he says, "Blast, why did the Valar send me here in this old man's body? No matter, it is not the strength of the body that matters, but the strength of the spirit." A scene that I think would have been quite nice to actually have in the movie, but unfortunately that was also cut. The Doors of Durin was a heavily cut scene that was initially over 6 minutes long, where there was a lot of interplay between the characters and comedy from Merry and Pippin. In the end, I think it was cut down to less than half of what it was supposed to be, but obviously a lot of things got the axe in this movie to make sure that the movie was a reasonable length.
We don't go over the mud. We go under it.
Same thing goes for the inside of Moria, where there was a lot of miniatures built that weren't shown to their full extent, and some short scenes with more conversation.
It is a marvel. Oh, no. Because
But something that I find really interesting is that the scene when Aragorn stabs the troll with a pike, you can see a lot of blood gushing down in front of Aragorn, but this was completely omitted from the movie to keep the age rating down. And that happens throughout the entire trilogy, where they filmed more gory blood scenes, but that had to be altered in order to keep the age rating down.
To the bridge of Khazad-dûm.
There's also a couple of short scenes to fill out, like when the Fellowship exits the chamber, or Boromir having a stare-off with a goblin. After Gandalf falls and the Fellowship exits Moria, there's a scene where they start to fight amongst each other and argue if it's the right thing to do or not to enter the forest, since they know it was dangerous and all the elves being there. And after that, there's a fairly large section that's cut, which is unfortunate as it's one of my favorite deleted scenes, which are the goblins actually hunting the Fellowship across both the mountain outside of Moria as well as into the forest. And when they get into the forest of Lothlorien, the goblins catch up to the Fellowship, causing a bit of a standoff. And this is the introduction to the elves, where they fire a huge volley of arrows that appear out of nowhere, killing all the goblins that were hunting them. There's actually a lot of footage and images of this, as you can see in the background, and I would have loved to see this, especially since they seem to have filmed so much of it, even of goblins being scattered all across the floor. The final cut of the movie was very short in this section in order to progress the story faster, and to some degree I can understand it, even though I would have loved to see some more elf versus orc action. They do say in the behind the scenes material that the entire section in Lothlorien was the one that was actually most heavily heavily cut in the final version. And there's some extra dialogue between Haldir and the Fellowship while they're trekking, and they look out towards Dol Guldur and discuss the growing evil there before they reach the Treetop City, something that was confirmed in the official script of the movie. And while they're in Lothlorien, there's a scene of Boromir explaining how he got over the death of one of his comrades, trying to comfort the hobbits after the death of Gandalf. There's also a lot of extra shots from the scouring of the Shire, such as like brutal scenes with orcs chucking around hobbits, and this is most likely from when Frodo looks into the Mirror of Galadriel, and they might actually have had a more full screen view of this that was cut out and replaced by the version we see in the final film. If you move over to Isengard, there is a deleted scene of Lurtz choking the orc overseer. I'm guessing they simply removed this because he already chokes another orc when he's born earlier in the movie, so it doesn't really make sense to have him choke two orcs. That would just be overdoing it. There's also a deleted line from Saruman. It's a bit unclear who he's talking to though, but he says the Grey Wizard is dead, his ragtag fellowship is leaderless, there's none left to defend it. It could potentially be when he talks to Sauron through the Palantir, or maybe to Grima Wormtongue. In the storyboard we can see an action sequence from the book where the Fellowship is ambushed by orcs in the Sarn-Gebir Rapids while traveling on the Anduin River after leaving Lothlorien. There's also this concept art of possibly this sequence taking place in the night instead of the day, and also potentially Gollum being on the log. It's said that this scene was partially shot because the set was destroyed somehow, but we couldn't really find a lot of information about it on the internet, so most of this sequence is still quite unknown. But if you know anything more about it, let us know in the comments below. Another magazine shot is of Frodo sleeping on the head of the statue in the forest before the confrontation between him and Boromir, or at least it looks like he's sleeping there. Jumping to the scene where Frodo puts on the ring and sees the Eye of Sauron and other things, they originally shot this as in the book, where he looks to the mountains and sees trolls coming down, and he sees ships filled with pirates, orcs, and things like that. They did film this but never completed the VFX for it, and went for a bit more simplistic version of where he just sees the Eye of Sauron. In terms of the fight up on Amon Hen, this was a fighting scene that was also unfortunately heavily cut, though there's a lot of shots of Aragorn, Gimli and Boromir fighting that didn't make it into the movie, and they also said that this was one of the fights where the biggest rating challenge of the movie was, and in order to keep the age rating down, they had to cut out a lot of the more brutal stuff in the movie, which is a bit of a shame. I really wish we could see like a higher age rating version of this, but I don't think that's ever gonna happen. And one scene that was cut into pieces is this one with Legolas firing arrows. In the theatrical version he fires 3 arrows, in the extended version he fires 6 arrows, but they actually filmed him firing 9 arrows. So if they ever make an extended 2.0, he might be firing 9 arrows in that one. And the very ending of the movie was originally shot completely different. When Frodo goes out in the boat, and Uruk actually drags Frodo out of the boat, and in this struggle the ring slips off Frodo's neck and into the water, and the Uruk then gets completely captivated by it and literally drowns, while Sam then helps Frodo out of the water, whacks the Uruk-Hai and retrieves the ring. I personally think that sounds a little bit weird, and I could totally understand why they ended up changing that for the final cut of the movie. But those are all of the deleted and alternate scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring that we dug out. We tried to find it both online and even going libraries to borrow some old Lord of the Rings books, which did have some of these images in them. I also want to mention that we do have videos up for both The Two Towers and Return of the King, so check out those if you are interested, and also let us know if you want to see us do the same thing for the Hobbit trilogy, as we would love to dig into that next. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, may the orcs be with you.